So a couple things. Let me start by saying I know that some of you had a really bad day yesterday with your football team. And please hear me when I say, with all the heartfelt reality, I've been suffering for 27 years. I get it. And I'm so sorry for that. But there is good news, right? Yesterday, the Texas State Bobcats beat a team from Arkansas. Not a big team from Arkansas, but so anyway, we always have, that's the team I played for. We don't usually beat anybody, but we beat Arkansas State yesterday. So eat 'em up cats, right? That's what we do. So we are going into Thanksgiving today, and in all honesty, want to start with gratitude for you. This is the 21st Thanksgiving I've been here. That is crazy. And so much to be thankful about and thankful for, and you know, of course, my family, but you guys are amazing. And so thank you for the chance to be here with you and to serve with you and to pursue God with you. It's just such an honor. And it's when you have a long relationship, you have ups and downs and difficulties, no matter what the relationship is. But the good memories outweigh any bad ones that are there. So thank you for sharing this journey with me. So we're going to continue through the story of Jonah today, and we're going to be in chapter 2. We'll actually read the last verse of chapter 1 as well. But just a quick reminder, God came to Jonah and said, I want you to go to Nineveh, which was 500 miles to the northeast. And so Jonah decided to go to the southwest to catch a boat in Joppa. And that boat was going to take him 2,500 miles away to the southern coast of Spain. And so he was going to get as far away from God as he possibly could because he did not want to go to Nineveh. And so God sent a storm, and the storm was so bad the sailors were freaking out. They cast lots to find out whose fault it was, and it fell on Jonah. Jonah had no desire to repent, no desire to get right with God, and told him, listen, the only way you're going to fix this is if you throw me overboard. Unwilling to jump over himself. So finally, after trying to save the ship and they couldn't, they threw him overboard. The sea went calm, and that's where we pick up the story today. So we are in Jonah chapter 2, actually 1:17, and I may mess up somebody upstairs, and I'm sorry for that, but it's a quick verse. Jonah chapter 1, verse 17, it's page 925 if you're using the Pew Bible. It says this, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I'm not going to spend any time trying to convince you that this could happen. There's been all kinds of studies about that, and I'll let you research that. The fish is a secondary part of the story, okay? And so I want to make that clear. And I believe it happened because Jesus did. That's where I land on it, because he talked about it. So you can research it and figure it out. There's all kinds of different stories about it and that sort of thing. But again, it's a secondary point as far as I'm concerned. So we pick up chapter 2, verse 1, and this is interesting. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, in my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the deep in the realm of the dead I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. That's the only place in all the Bible it says that. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountain I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Okay. There's a lot here and a lot of different things that we could talk about, but I want to focus on just a couple. But let me say this as a background. Most of the scholars believe that the content of what is written here was a part of Jonah's prayer, but he actually turned it into a song later on. and what we have is the song itself, not the actual prayer. You can debate that if you want to, but it makes sense because it's very much like the Psalms you find in the book of Psalms. All right, so in my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me from deep in the realm of the dead. I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight. I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me, and seaweed was wrapped around my head. Jonah had this incredible experience, and looking at it as you read through it, he almost died. And it was at the very point of death that he decided, I was wrong. And he called out to God. Right? It wasn't on the boat when the storm came. It wasn't when the soldiers were being threatened, or the sailors were being threatened to die. It was when he was almost dead. He finally ran to God in desperation. Right? And so he called out to God from the bottom of the ocean. And so it's interesting, if you look in verse 3, he says, you hurled me into the water. Well, it was really kind of Jonah's fault. Right? And the idea is, I think, that when Jonah, once he was in the water, he couldn't come up. There was nothing he could do. And so God had this idea that you're going to stay down here until you run to me, which he finally did. Now, it's interesting, when you look at it, more than likely what happened is he was swallowed by this fish, and he woke up inside of it after passing out. Okay? So here he was at the bottom of the ocean as he understood it, and he had no hope at all, and he finally turned to God, and so he stops and he says, wow, you saved me. So I want us to start with this point, and I think this is important for us in our current reality. God hears prayers of desperation, even when it's our fault or we're in the situation we're in. God hears our prayers of desperation, even when it's our fault that we're in a desperate state. Now, let me follow up and say this. It took almost death for Jonah to run back to God. And out of desperation, he prayed. But just because we pray the prayer doesn't mean God is going to answer it the way we want it answered. He hears those prayers of desperation, but his plan may be a little different than ours. Right? So I don't know how you are in prayers of desperation, but prayers of desperation for me typically go like this. God hears the problem, and here's how you fix it. This is A, I need B. Would you take care of that, please? Right? And so our prayers of desperation, whether it has to do with a sickness or it has to do with finances or it has to do with a loved one, our prayer usually is, God, this is the problem. I know you know the problem, but in case you didn't know, here's the answer. Not too long ago, I interacted with someone who was a believer but has become an atheist. And so I asked that person, I said, so what was the draw to atheism? And the response was, well, through all of my journey, God never answered one of my prayers. Now, because of what the conversation was, I didn't say it at this point, but the thought that came into my head was, well, the truth is, God answered every one of your prayers, just not the way you wanted to. See, I think we have this idea, yes, God hears our prayers of desperation, but we forget that God has a different plan than we do. Right? God has a different understanding of the reality that's going on. And so we come to God and we say, this is the plan, this is how you need to fix it. And like we sang, you're going to do all these things that are good for me. And I think we misunderstand what good means. You know, in Romans 8, it says, all things work together for good for those who love God. We don't understand what good means. See, good for us means that God gives me what I want when I want it. But what good really means is that God will give you what you need to grow in faith, to become more like him. So when Jonah cried out in desperation, God intervened. He used a vehicle, a fish, to save him. And I'm sure when he woke up inside the fish, he wasn't thinking, wow, this is great. You know, I think when we hear this story, we think of the old Pinocchio cartoon, for those of us who've been around a long time. You know, when they're in the big well and they're sitting at a table playing cards, and it's like, no, I think you need to imagine that there was just enough room for him. And I suspect he was really irritated. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And so God didn't answer the prayer the way Jonah wanted to, but he did answer the prayer. Okay? And so I think we need to be reminded, you know, when Jesus, when he was praying before he was arrested, he said, not my will, but yours be done. And that's how we have to see this reality. There are times of desperation that we go to God, and God hears us, but God sees things differently than we do because his plan takes priority. I know a guy who, he applied for a job that was perfect for him. So he was going to go to a different company, and so he applied, and he began the interview process, and you know, as processes go, they take a long time now, but he received a phone call and was told, listen, it's down to 2 people, and you're one of them, so we have one more interview for you. So he went to this interview, and interview went well, and he thought, well, I've got it. You know, this is a perfect fit for me, and he'd been praying, God, you know, open this door for me because it's the right thing. And lo and behold, he got a call and said, we chose the other guy. And he was devastated. And frankly, in talking to him, he was angry with God. What is the deal? We saw this. This was a perfect fit. This is exactly where I needed to be, and you know that, and you made me to be this way. And well, what happened was, in a few years, the company went through massive layoffs and barely survived. And he probably wouldn't have made it had he gone. He came back and he said, you know what? God protected me from myself. So we go to God, and we know in those times of desperation, we pray and we ask God to intervene, and we have a plan, but God doesn't always see it the way we do it. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. I could stand here and tell you story after story of times that we've prayed over someone, laying hands on them, and how God has healed them. And I could also tell you story after story of how we prayed over someone, laid hands on them, and they weren't healed. I don't understand. I don't understand why God chooses to do what he chooses to do, but he's God and he gets to choose it. And so God hears those prayers of desperation, and he knows. And so the encouragement is, when you have those times of desperation, run to him. Even if the time of desperation is your own fault, run to him. He will hear. But you have to trust that he's got the best plan. See, instead of praying, God, here's the problem and here's the solution, we need to pray, God, here's the problem. Please do what's very best for me. Please do what's very best for me. And that he will do every time. So we go on, and there's something else I think that is very important for us, and particularly today, is that gratitude should be a normal part of the Christ follower life. Gratitude should be a normal part of the Christ follower life. When you read this story, do you realize that Jonah's being thankful for the fish, right? He's being thankful for a fish. I've never been inside a fish. I've caught a few, cleaned a few, never been inside one. But I suspect it was not a pleasant experience. But have you ever thought about why it took 3 days? Now, I know the whole Jesus prediction thing was a part of it, but you ever think about why Jonah had to be in the fish 3 days? See, I think I have a personality a lot like Jonah's. So I think I can understand why. I think it took 3 days for Jonah to be broken. I think it took 3 days of being in the fish for him to finally say, you know what, God, I was wrong. You know what, God, I messed up. And I can just hear him the first 2 days complaining the whole time. This fish is too small. Why don't you spit me up on the ground? Why don't you save me some other way? Why don't you do it differently? This is not the best way to do this. God, you're messing up here. I don't want to go to Nineveh. And then finally in day 3, it was like, you know what? I'm stupid. I'm sorry. And there was a transformation of his heart that took place. And he stopped and he thanked God for the fish. I'm alive. I'm alive. Thank you, Lord. And I think it took this reality of breaking him down to the point when he realized, you know what? God's been good to me. And again, going back to Jonah's journey, Jonah had stood before kings and told them all the things they were doing wrong before God, risking his life every time. Didn't faze him. But good grief, I don't want to go to Nineveh. I hate those people. And it was there in the bottom of the ocean, inside the fish, where he finally was able to say, God, I blew it. Thank you. Again, in verse 3, you notice he still blames the whole thing on God, but I think there is a transformation of his heart that is pretty powerful. And there's this call for us as followers of Jesus to always have a heart of gratitude. And let's be honest, sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's really hard to be thankful. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes we get angry with God. Sometimes we get frustrated. And it's hard to be thankful. But you know what? James wrote it very clearly. Really, it's all throughout the New Testament, but he wrote it the most clear. He said, consider it pure joy when you encounter various trials. And he goes on to say that the reason that you need to consider it pure joy you encounter trials is because God is moving you to perfection or to maturity. Right? Because I know this is going to be hard for some of us to hear. We haven't arrived yet. In our faith, we haven't arrived yet. And if you think you've arrived in your faith, hold on tight. Because there's something coming. It may not be a fish on the bottom of the ocean, but there's something coming. Because as sad as it is and as hard as it is to accept, the reality is that God moves us towards godlikeness through difficult times. And one of the things I've said to you for 20 years, and I'm going to say again today, God's goal for us is not happiness, it's godliness. Now, don't mishear me. God doesn't dislike it when we're happy. That's not what I'm saying. I think like any father, he rejoices when his children are happy. But the truth is, the goal is not our happiness, it's our godliness. And so sometimes we have to go through difficulty and heartache to get where he wants us to be. And so this whole reality of being thankful when it doesn't make any sense is significant for us. So has anybody ever been to physical therapy? You know, you go to physical therapy when you first start, you just think that those people were trained by the Inquisitor in the Spanish Inquisition. Right? It's like, I'm going to make you hurt more than you've ever hurt in your life, and I'm going to enjoy it. And I know that's not really what they think, but it seems like that, right? So I remember when I had to go for my shoulder, and the therapist said, all right, I want you to raise your shoulder above your head. I was like, I can't even raise it 6 inches. No, we're going to get it above your head. No. Right? And you go through that, you go through it again and again and again until hopefully, finally, one day, you can use it again. It may not be as good as it was, but it's stronger than it would have been had you not been through it. Right? And so whether it's a knee or an ankle or a foot or a shoulder or an arm, back, whatever it is, you go through the agony of this reality of trying to make yourself strong enough so that you can at least be somewhat normal, right? And so if you notice, when I stand up here, my leg's crooked. That's an old football injury. And that took a lot of time of therapy for me to be able to even stand here. Now, I look silly, but it works, right? And that's what physical therapy is. You have this journey of you are hurt and you are trying to get better, but you can't get better until you go through that journey. Spiritually, we have the same reality with God. God sees our potential and our possibility. He sees who we can become. And so sometimes we have to go through heartache and disappointment, and we have to come to the realization that God is using this as a way to promote me in my faith, to make me more like He wants me to be. And so the goal is not my happiness, but my godliness. And so like James, if we're honest and we can step back from it, and hopefully it doesn't take as long as it took Jonah to realize that he needed to be thankful, we can step back and say, you know what, Lord, thank you. Thank you that you're working on me. I don't like it. I hate it. It's disappointing. It's awful. But I thank you that this is going someplace. Because you know what's best for me. You know what I really need. And so all of that is to come back to this reality in the Thanksgiving season. Some years it's hard to be thankful. Let's be honest. Some years it's harder than others to be thankful. And I don't know where you are in this season of your life and this year. But here's what I've learned in the many decades that I've been alive. When I focus on what I don't have, or focus on a different place I'd rather be, or focus on a different reality, gratitude's a long way away. But when I focus on what I have, and where I am, and what I've been given, gratitude's a lot closer. You see, one of the things that our society has taught us is that we need to live a comparative life, meaning I need to compare my life to yours, you need to compare your life to mine, and society has taught us that we compare ourselves to others, then we realize how much we don't have. And we realize how awful our lives really are, but the truth is that's not what a Christ follower life is supposed to be. A Christ follower life steps back and says, wow, look what God's given me. Look what He's given me. And we celebrate the things that we have, no matter how small or how great. We stop and we say thank you, and we especially say thank you for Jesus. You know, one of the interesting things about Jonah is in chapter 2, he's very open to accepting God's mercy. But in chapter 4, he doesn't want God to have mercy on the Ninevites. You see, he's comparing himself to them. I'm one of the chosen ones, so I'm special. And this comparative thing that we do, it just brings misery for us. Instead, perhaps we stop, we say, thank you. Thank you for all you've done. And the truth is, if there's nothing else to be thankful about, you do have this one. God decided you were worth the sacrifice of Jesus. You were worth it. You didn't deserve it. I didn't either. You didn't earn it. He decided you were worth it. And so this Thanksgiving season, and there's a lot that goes on in this Thanksgiving week, and it's a fun time for families typically, and a lot to focus on. But I do pray and I do hope that in this season of Thanksgiving, even if things are not going the way you want them to go, that you can stop and be grateful for a God who said you were worth it. You were worth it. Let's pray.